Markley.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise for the purpose of an amendment.
Please proceed, sir.
The clerk is in possession of LCO number 8906.
Mr. Clerk.
LCO number 8906, Senate Amendment Schedule C, offered by Senator Markley.
Senator Markley.
Mr. President, I move passage of the amendment, ask that the reading be waived, and beg leave to comment.
Please proceed, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I've been involved over 30 years in politics, on and off. I guess I could say very much on sometimes and very much off at other times. And one of the things I felt almost from the beginning of my involvement is that contrary to the general perception, or the perception of many, the caliber of people engaged in politics is I think, surprisingly strong. I've been impressed by the intelligence and the goodwill and the sincerity, the good intent of the people that I've met in that time. That said, I have to say over the 30 years, I have been witness to some absolute ethical disasters, some real tragedies on a personal level that maybe were the result of bad behavior, but are tragic nonetheless when it happens to somebody that you have come to like, that you've come to respect in many results. And I've seen that happen. I've also seen improprieties that perhaps went unremarked, but were visible to me. And I would say especially when I served in the majority in this chamber back in the 80s, maybe because such things are more likely to happen in the majority because there's more power to be wielded and more reason for power to be influenced. And I suppose a side of me feels that that's not unusual, that in any profession, any undertaking, there's going to be good and bad, competent and incompetent, and that we can't necessarily expect that something magical will happen to us because we've come into this arena that's going to make us better than our fellows. And maybe you get used to it in some ways, and it becomes, as they say, the water that you swim in. I hate to think that that happens too much. But certainly we are in a different field, a field that requires that we stand here and take an oath just to do our jobs, a field which is undoubtedly a public trust. And I know that the general public has very much lost confidence in our integrity. I get the same emails that you do that are that have a tone of throw the bums out, that are pretty disgusted with all of us to one extent or another. And it's frustrating, of course, because I think that by and large we don't merit it. And yet events drive such a thing, drive a contempt for people that are involved in politics, and a cynicism about the behavior of government, which is very unhealthy, not just for us on a personal level, that doesn't make much difference, but for the institution of which we form a part while we stand here today. That's been on my mind on and off, I suppose, for years. Earlier this year, I got to know Tom Foley during the last gubernatorial campaign and came to like him and to respect him. And in conversation with him earlier this year on this subject, Ambassador Foley and I came up with the idea of proposing legislation which would tighten ethical standards for state legislators and for government officials generally. And I filed a bill and got it raised by petition at the Government Administrations and Elections Committee. And I felt that largely with Ambassador Foley's effort, that we had at least the beginnings of an idea that might be worth discussing. It's probably the most, I'd have to say, not only the most naive thing I ever did as a legislator, but I think I could admit it was probably the thing I handled the worst of anything that I've done in my 5 sessions up here as a legislator. And largely because of my own poor handling, Ambassador Foley walked into something of a buzzsaw at the GAE committee. I have to say I was surprised at the way that he was handled for what I thought was an essentially good idea, whether it was properly drafted or properly delineated in the terms in which we presented it. I was rather amazed at the resistance that it attracted. And I think the next thing I would say is that in a way I was alarmed by the resistance that it attracted. That the idea of saying that we need to have the highest ethical standards practical for ourselves would be seen as an insult to the institution, when in fact it was meant as a compliment and an assistance to the institution. I think that unfortunate events that have involved lawmakers here have sharpened the need for the kind of thing that we suggested. And the ambassador and I have continued to try to work on language here, along with leadership in my caucus. And to that end, we have the amendment which you see before us. It's much more narrowly written than what was presented before the GAE committee, and it also is not an amendment which attempts to restrict office holding, but rather to delineate more clearly the lines of conflicts of interest, to give us the opportunity to recuse ourselves, as often happens here in the legislature and always has happened. I think that it tries to make clear exactly where the line is. And I think we should see that not as a threat, but as a service to us, to know where the danger lies, and to know the grounds on which we must absent ourselves from the debate. And this is done in this legislation by extending to the definition of public officials who are in substantial conflict, those who would be in receipt of $1,000 or more from a state contract affected by the legislation before us, by paid by a union on dealing with a union issue, a public employee union, those who have an interest paid by a lobbying firm when things which affect the lobbying firm come before the legislature, or any other business interests which would be affected in that way by legislative action. Again, my point is not to catch anyone. I think that by the time the impropriety happens, the law has not functioned properly. The point of the law is not to create lawbreakers, but to enable good behavior. And I think this particular amendment, I believe, draws a bright line that all of us can see easily and that all of us can come to respect. I think it would be good for the institution, and I think it would be good for the people of the state to know how seriously we take our obligation to be ethical, to be disinterested, and to be above reproach. And in that spirit, I would encourage my colleagues here to support the amendment. Thank you very much, Madam President.
Thank you. Will you remark? Will you remark? Senator Wells, do you want to?
Thank you, Madam President. I rise to support this amendment. I thank Senator Markley and others who have worked hard to bring what is before us. I think, as Senator Markley noted, everything we do here is essentially an action in trust on behalf of the public that sent us here. And I know everybody in this circle takes that very, very seriously. But I think as Senator Markley said, sometimes we find ourselves in shades of gray. And shades of gray aren't good for the public with respect to their perception of us. And shades of gray aren't good for us in helping us make good, right, and clear decisions. And I think what the amendment does for us is it draws those lines a little brighter. A little brighter. So we know when it's now appropriate to say recuse ourselves from a decision or a vote. I think this amendment is extremely important for us now for two reasons. One, obviously, events in the news have caused the public to question what it is we do up here. Just the other night, we passed some campaign finance reform, which I would argue, and did argue, opens the door for more bad things to happen. What this amendment, I think, says to the people of the state of Connecticut is that we take our jobs seriously, we take our decisions seriously, and we take our ethics seriously. And I think it goes, I wouldn't say a long way, but at least moves us in the right direction in restoring that trust with the public, which is so important to us and to them and to the success of government in Connecticut. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. Will you remark? Senator McKinney.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise in support of the amendment. And I know that the hour is late on our last night, so there's a lot of history we could go through in Connecticut as to why this is such a critically important issue. But I think that can be said and saved for another day. I want to thank Senator Markley for working with me and talking out these very important issues. And quite frankly, his perspective as one who was here in a different era, if I can say that respectfully, in 1984 and here today is very important. And I don't mean that in terms of age, as I've already celebrated my last birthday I'll ever celebrate, since I won't have the 50th ever. I say that because what the public perceives, what the public expects out of their public officials is very different. And as their expectations and their hopes and their perceptions change, we need to recognize and we also need to change. Things that may have been okay 20 years ago are not now. And I mean that from a perception standpoint only. And we are not doing ourselves the honor or our constituents by ignoring that reality. Because the reality is that if there is one person bad, we all look bad. And I know I get more frustrated at that perception than anything else up here. Because I know how hard we work. I know how honest and diligent people in this circle and in this legislature, past and present, are. So this is a debate that in our caucus we've had with the fact that we are one of two states that does not have a legislative ethics commission. We desperately believe we need to have one. And we also desperately believe that all of the gray lines need to be turned to dark black so that everybody knows what the rules are, so that everybody knows where they can go, what they can do, and what they can't. Because that is what the people expect and demand of us. And I know, quite frankly, that's what we deliver, but the perception is that we don't. So my hope is that as we start next session, working with members of our caucus and yours and down in the House, we can have a serious discussion. I know that people from the Office of State Ethics have worked diligently at trying to get at many of these issues for years. And I'm under no illusion that perhaps the toughest thing you can do in this building is sit in judgment of one of your own or talk about how people react. But the reality is this place is much bigger than any one of us here. and we need this place to survive long beyond the tenure of any one of us in this center, in this circle. And without the public trust, we don't have anything. I remember a former, probably going longer than I wanted to, Madam President, but I remember a former colleague of yours in the House, I believe, and of others who served in the House, Representative Carl Dickman. I believe you served with Representative Dickman, Madam. A wonderful man from Fairfield who's since left us. And, every year as part of the Fairfield delegation, we would get invited by our local League of Women Voters. And we would give a legislative discussion with the League of Women Voters, and there'd be 40, 50, 60 people. It was always in January, right before or right after the session started, to talk about the session. What are we going to do? Answer questions. And the League would always have coffee and donuts, usually Dunkin' Donuts, but they would always have coffee and donuts. And there was Representative Dickman coming in with his own Dunkin' Donuts cup. And we would kind of look at him funny, and in his way, he didn't make them feel as comfortable with what he was doing. It wasn't that he was disrespecting them, but he said that in his world, as a state representative, he had always had the belief that he would not take a single potato chip from anybody who had any interest in state government. And so as good as the League of Women Voters was, and as nonpartisan and public education as the event was, he was going to bring his own coffee and not take theirs, because he never wanted anyone to question his motives for doing something. Now, perhaps a little bit extreme, but if you think about it, the old TV commercial that you can't just stop at one potato chip, you got to keep having them, he may have been onto something. So I apologize for going longer. I do hope this is something we can seriously address in the next session of the legislature. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. Will you remark? Senator Maynard.
Thank you, Madam President. I thank the proponent of the amendment, and I thank Senator McKinney. I think all of us who serve here in the circle share a desire for the highest standards of ethical performance and want our citizens to know that we hold ourselves to a high standard. And I look forward to working alongside all of my colleagues here in pursuing that in the coming session. I would say, regrettably, given the late hour, the final night of session, and the fact that the bill needs to move in the House, I would regretfully ask my colleagues to to decline from supporting this amendment and be able to move the bill promptly to the House chamber. But I do sincerely thank Senator McKinney for his efforts on this regard. Thank you.
Thank you. Will you remark? Senator Meyer.
Thank you, Madam President. I just wanted to speak in opposition to this bill, because this is a bill that allows us as elected officials to receive 1,000.
Senator Meyer, the amendment.
I'm sorry.
We're on the amendment, sir.
The amendment is LCO 8906?
Right. You said the bill. I just want to make sure.
I'm sorry. I'm on the amendment.
Thank you. Thank you.
This is an amendment which allows us as elected officials to receive $1,000 from a state contractor every year, whereas the current law in Connecticut is we can receive only nothing from a state contractor. This is an amendment which will allow us to receive $1,000 a year from lobbyists, when the current law in Connecticut limits what we can take from a lobbyist to $100 as a result of the Citizens United case. This is a so-called ethics amendment that's leading us in the wrong direction, not the right direction, and I urge its defeat.
Thank you. Will you remark? Will you remark? Senator Maynard?
Just, if I may, Madam, if when the call is taken, it could be taken by roll call, when the vote is taken.
It will be called by roll call. Senator Markley.
Just to respond quickly to Senator Meyer, and I don't want to start in a debate at this point, but the idea is not what we would receive by way of gift, but as rather to be employed. If the employment is $1,000 or more, so somebody who actually works for a company, if that company, It's I won't. I don't want to get in a debate about legal language with Senator Meyer because I know who's going to win that. But that's where we're headed with it. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, sir. Will you remark further? Will you remark further? If not, Mr. Clerk, will you call a roll call vote and the machine will be open.
Immediate roll call has been ordered in the Senate. Senators, please return to the chamber. Immediate roll call on Senate Amendment Schedule C has been ordered in the Senate.
Call it for one more time, please. Nope, it's never mind. I see her out there. Senator Hartley's coming in, so never mind. Thank you. If all members voted, the machine will be closed. Mr. Clerk, will you call a tally?
Senate Amendment Schedule C for Senate Bill 1043, total number voting 35, those voting yea 14, those voting nay 21, absent not voting 1.
The amendment fails. Will you remark further? Senator Boucher.